The year is 1953. The world is split in two East against West, democracy versus communism. But this war isn't fought solely on battlefields or in missile silos. It's a war of ideology, of influence, and of the mind. Behind closed doors in Washington, fear is growing. Reports out of Korea and China claim that American prisoners of war are returning home, different, indoctrinated, broken. Some call it brainwashing. And to the CIA, it's a threat that demands a counterattack. In the shadows of the Cold War, the United States embarks on a covert mission, unlike anything seen before. The objective isn't just to resist enemy influence, but to take control. To break minds, reshape thoughts, and perhaps even erase identities. The operation is called MKUltra, authorized by CIA Director Allen Dulles, and led by a man who would become both a ghost and a legend inside the agency, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. A chemist with a black budget and a blank check, Gottlieb was tasked with exploring the darkest corners of psychological science. With paranoia as its fuel and secrecy as its shield, MKUltra would unfold in secret labs, hospital wards, college campuses, and even brothels. The tools were unconventional and often horrifying: LSD, hypnosis, isolation, electroshock. The targets: sometimes volunteers, more often not. This was not science fiction. This was sanctioned, funded, and real. And what began as an arms race for the mind would leave behind shattered lives, buried documents, and questions that remain unanswered to this day. April 13th, 1953. Behind a nondescript desk in Langley, Virginia, a signature is placed on a document that will forever change the nature of intelligence operations. CIA Director Allen Dulles has just authorized Project MKUltra. The timing is no coincidence. The United States is reeling from reports that Soviet and Chinese scientists may have discovered techniques for mental coercion techniques that could turn soldiers into traitors or assassins into puppets. The CIA is desperate to catch up. To lead this radical project, Dulles appoints a man unlike any other in the agency, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. The son of Hungarian Jewish immigrants, Gottlieb is a trained chemist with a clubfoot and a stutterbutt. He's also fiercely intelligent, fiercely patriotic, and fascinated by how chemicals might influence the human brain. Gottlieb isn't looking to follow the rule, she's looking to rewrite them. Under his command, MKUltra expands rapidly. Laboratories spring up under false names. Grants are funneled through front organizations. Universities, hospitals, and prisons become unknowing test grounds. At the heart of the program lies a single question: can a human mind be broken and rebuilt? Gottlieb believes the answer is yes. And with little oversight, millions of dollars are poured into experiments meant to shatter the human psyche and reassemble it with precision. He authorizes tests using LSD, barbiturates, amphetamines, hypnosis, sleep deprivation, and electroconvulsive shocks, sometimes all at once. To many within the agency, he becomes known only by a nickname, the Black Sorcerer. MKUltra is now operational. The war for the mind has begun not in enemy territory, but right here, at home. The methods employed by MKUltra were as diverse as they were disturbing. There was no single experiment, no unified plan only. A relentless obsession with cracking open the human mind and peering inside. Sidney Gottlieb believed that in order to build a mind from scratch, one first had to destroy it. And so the early years of MKUltra became a whirlwind of trial and terror. LSD quickly became the project's chemical of choice. At the time, it was a relatively unknown compound, newly synthesized and poorly understood. Gottlieb saw it as a kind of psychological scalpel, capable of slicing away at consciousness itself. CIA agents, soldiers, mental patients, and civilians, some voluntary, many not, were given LSD in controlled and uncontrolled doses. Some were told, most were not. The results were unpredictable. Some subjects became euphoric. Others descended into panic, psychosis, even catatonia. At least one agent was dosed continuously for 77 straight days. But drugs were only one weapon in the arsenal. Hypnosis was tested to see if agents could be programmed to kill on commander, forget what they had done. Sleep deprivation, combined with sensory overload or complete isolation, pushed participants to the brink of collapse. In other trials, subjects were fed barbiturates to knock them unconscious, only to be revived moments later with stimulants. All the while, interrogators shouted questions at them, recording their responses for patterns. Everything was an experiment. No line was sacred. No subject too vulnerable. These were not scenes from a dystopian novel. They were real, and they were happening on American soil with the full backing of the government. As MK Ultra expanded, the experiments began to move outside the laboratory and into the streets. In 1955, Sidney Gottlieb authorized a sub-project so audacious it sounded like fiction. It was called Operation Midnight Climax, and its stage was set in the heart of San Francisco's red light district. The CIA rented several apartments, secretly rigged them with microphones and one-way mirrors, and transformed them into covert observation sites. But these weren't ordinary surveillance points. Inside, CIA-hired sex workers were instructed to lure unsuspecting Monophon drifters, bar patrons, or casual Johns back to the safe houses. Once inside, the drinks were spiked with LSD, and the subjects were left to trip while CIA operatives watched and took notes from behind mirrored glass. The goal? To observe how people reacted to acid in real-world, sexually charged situations, and how their behavior could be manipulated. Some agents believed the data could help train American spies to withstand interrogation. Others thought it might teach them how to control foreign agents through drugs and seduction. The men being experimented on had no idea they were being used as human test subjects. These sessions often stretched through the night, filled with surveillance, manipulation, and deep ethical violations. Some reports suggest that operatives themselves became addicted to the power, experimenting for their own amusement under the guise of research. Operation Midnight Climax ran for nearly a decade. It was never approved by Congress, never disclosed to the public, and like so many chapters of MKULT8, left no formal paper trail, only shadows. While MK Ultra's experiments in the U.S. pushed boundaries, its reach extended far beyond national borders. North of the American border, in Montreal, Canada, a renowned psychiatrist named Dr. Ewan Cameron was conducting experiments that would later be remembered as some of the most inhumane in modern medical history. Operating out of the prestigious Allen Memorial Institute at McGill University, Cameron's work was initially funded by the Canadian government. But when the CIA learned of his radical theories on depatterning the mind, they began secretly funneling money through MK Ultra to support his research. Cameron believed that mental illness could be cured by erasing a patient's personality entirely, then rebuilding it from scratch. He used massive doses of electroconvulsive therapy, far beyond what was considered safe. Patients were subjected to drug-induced comas, lasting up to 60 days. While comatose, they were bombarded with repetitive audio messages, sometimes thousands of times a day. Phrases like, "You are a good mother," "You will not be afraid," "You are not angry." This was called psychic driving, and it was believed to overwrite the subconscious mind. But the reality was horrifying. Patients admitted for minor issues anxiety, postpartum depression, fatigue emerged broken. Many forgot how to speak. Others no longer recognized their families. Some lost decades of memory. And none of them had consented. Years later, survivors would sue the CIA and the Canadian government. The trials revealed just how far-reaching MKULTRA's grip had become, and how deep the wounds still ran. In the autumn of 1958, a 16-year-old prodigy stepped onto the campus of Harvard University. His name was Ted Kaczynski, mathematical genius, introverted, awkward, and unaware that he was about to become part of a psychological experiment that many believe left a lasting scar. Harvard, like many elite institutions of the era, received CIA funding through front organizations. One of the professors working with these funds was Dr. Henry Murray, a former OSS officer and Harvard psychologist who had worked in wartime intelligence. Murray's project wasn't about education. It was about stress, identity, and the limits of mental resilience. Over the course of 3 years, Kaczynski and other students were subjected to a series of purposeful humiliation experiments. The young volunteers were instructed to write detailed essays about their beliefs, ideals, and personal philosophies. Then, without warning, they were aggressively attacked by a team of attorneys and psychologists in closed interrogation rooms. These sessions were filmed. The participants' reactions were dissected, recorded, and analyzed. The goal? To break down their sense of self. Kaczynski endured more than 200 hours of this psychological assault. To this day, it's unclear whether Murray's experiments were directly affiliated with MKUltra. But the parallels are unmistakable. Deception, manipulation, and mental destabilizational with little regard for the long-term effects. Years later, Kaczynski would vanish into the Montana wilderness, re-emerging only as the Unabomber, mailing explosive packages to scientists and technologists across the country. Some have speculated that the seeds of his violent manifesto, his deep distrust of authority, his hatred of modern science were planted during those early Harvard years. Whether that link is real or convenient, one fact remains. A government-funded experiment tried to dismantle a young mind, and it may have succeeded. In the fall of 1953, Frank Olsona, U.S. Army biochemist working at the top-secret Camp Detrick, began to unravel. For years, Olson had worked on America's most sensitive biological warfare programs. He developed aerosolized anthrax, studied nerve agents, and sat in on some of the CIA's darkest discussions. But something shifted after a retreat in the woods of Deep Creek Lake, Maryland. There, without his knowledge, Olson was slipped a dose of LSD as part of a covert MKUltra test. CIA chemist Sidney Gottlieb had orchestrated the meeting under the pretense of a team-building seminar. The effects were immediate and devastating. Olson became paranoid, withdrawn, and unstable. He began questioning the morality of his work and expressed desires to leave the program. The CIA took no chances. He was brought to New York under the care of Dr. Harold Abramson, another MKUltra associate. They checked him into room 1018A of the Statler Hotel. Days later, just before dawn, Olson fell 13 stories to his death from that hotel window. The official story: suicide. But Olson's family never believed it. For decades, the case remained buried beneath layers of secrecy. Then, in the 1970s, revelations about MKUltra began surfacing. The Olson family pushed for answers, and in 1994, Frank's body was exhumed. The forensic report concluded that injuries to his skull were consistent with a blow, not a fall. The question remains chilling. Did Frank Olson jump or was he pushed? In 1996, President Clinton offered the family a formal apology, but no one was ever prosecuted. No documents ever proved what truly happened that night. Frank Olson's death became the first public crack in the armor of MKUltra, glimpse into a hidden world where human life was expendable, and truth was a casualty of control. For 2 decades, MKUltra remained a secret hidden behind layers of classified memos and false names. But in 1974, cracks in the facade began to show. Investigative journalist Seymour Hersh published a bombshell report in the New York Times revealing illegal CIA operations against American citizens. Among them, experiments with mind, altering drugs. The public was outraged. Congress launched an official investigation. Leading the charge was Senator Frank Church, head of the Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities later, known simply as the Church Committee. In televised hearings, CIA officials admitted to a staggering truth. Thousands of Americans had been experimented on without their consent. Universities and hospitals were used as fronts. Documents had been destroyed, and many records might never be recovered. The Church Committee uncovered that over 150 subprojects had operated under MK-Ultra's umbrella. Some dealt with hypnosis, others with torture. Some explored the use of drugs for mind erasure. When asked whether the experiments were still ongoing, the CIA insisted the project had been shut down in 1973 by then Director Richard Helms. But Helms had also ordered most of the files destroyed, just days before he left office. That destruction made full accountability impossible. Only a fraction of paper trails survived enough to terrify, but not enough to convict. Senator Church's words echoed with gravity. If this government ever became a tyranny, the technological capacity that the intelligence community has given the government could enable it to impose total tyranny. With the world watching, MK-Ultra was finally dragged into the light. But justice, if it ever came, was incomplete. No one went to prison. No restitution was made to most victims. And the true extent of what happened remains unknown. In the years following the Church Committee hearings, the government tried quietly to move on. But the wounds MK-Ultra had opened ran deep, and for many, the damage was permanent. Survivors came forward with haunting stories. Some had lost their memories. Others had battled lifelong trauma, anxiety, hallucinations, and paranoia. In 1995, during a wave of declassification efforts, President Bill Clinton issued a public apology to victims of government experimentation, including those unknowingly used in MK-Ultra. He said, "The United States of America offers a sincere apology to those of its citizens who were subjected to these experiments, whose lives were profoundly altered without their knowledge or consent." But for most victims, words were not enough. Lawsuits were filed, but most were dismissed. Courts cited a lack of surviving evidence, much of it destroyed by the CIA in 1973, as a legal barrier to prosecution or compensation. In Canada, where the Montreal experiments left dozens permanently damaged, the federal government eventually paid financial settlements, but only to a select few. Most victims were left with nothing but unanswered questions and empty files. Even today, hundreds of names remain redacted. Dozens of subprojects are known only by code, and key documents, if they exist, are still locked away in government vaults, their release blocked by national security exemptions. Some speculate that MK-Ultra never truly ended, that its methods were simply folded into newer, darker programs. Others believe its exposure triggered reforms, placing stronger guardrails on intelligence work and ethics. But one truth remains clear. MK-Ultra left behind a legacy of silence, pain, and mistrust, and the full truth may never be known. Even after MK-Ultra was exposed and officially ended, its shadow never faded. The very idea that a government could secretly drug and manipulate its own citizens struck a deep, raw nerve in the public psyche. In time, MK-Ultra didn't just become history, it became mythology. In 1962, The Manchurian Candidate hit theaters. It told the story of a brainwashed assassin programmed by enemy agents. It was fiction, yet eerily aligned with the real goals of MK-Ultra. Decades later, echoes of the project would ripple through everything from science fiction to horror. Films like Jacob's Ladder, Conspiracy Theory, and even shows like The X-Files and Stranger Things all drew from the imagery and themes of MK-Ultra, secrecy, psychological warfare, and the terrifying idea that your thoughts may not be your own. In underground circles, MK-Ultra became a pillar of modern conspiracy lore. Did it really end? Was it replaced by another program with a different name? Could it explain the strange behavior of public figures or mass events? To some, it became a symbol of government overreach. To others, a convenient explanation for the inexplicable. The project's ambiguity, the missing files, the redacted names, the destroyed evidence left a vacuum, and in that vacuum, stories grew. MKUltra became shorthand for everything the public feared but couldn't prove. Mind control, false memories, covert influence. Even musicians and artists have drawn inspiration from MKUltra. Lyrics, concept albums, and graffiti with cryptic references, "They're watching you," "You're not in control," have all tapped into the cultural paranoia the project helped unleash. And while some of those fears drift into the surreal, the core remains grounded in something very real. For 2 decades, the U.S. government did try to control the mind, and we only know the part they didn't succeed in hiding. MKUltra was never about just one project, one drug, or one decade. It was about something far more dangerous, the belief that secrecy justifies anything. That if a threat is big enough, and the goal is abstract enough, then any method is permissible. At its core, MKUltra asked one terrifying question. If we could control the human mind, should we? And the answer, in practice, was a quiet, calculated yes from those in power, behind doors that were never meant to open. What began as a Cold War panic evolved into something far more intimate and sinister. Researchers didn't just want to break enemies. They wanted to rebuild people, to rewrite thoughts, to own the inner voice that whispers who you are. And they did so without consent, without oversight, and with almost no consequences. The scars remain not just in the lives of the victims, but in the very institutions we were told to trust. Hospitals became laboratories, professors became collaborators, guards became gatekeepers, and intelligence agencies became experimenters in the name of patriotism. To this day, MKUltra is invoked any time a government steps too far, when surveillance programs expand without explanation, when a whistleblower reveals hidden testing, when a classified memo is found years too late. The name still echoes cold, clinical, unrepentant. It's a reminder that the line between science and abuse can disappear when ethics are silenced by fear, that knowledge in the wrong hands becomes not wisdom but weapon. And in today's world where your location is tracked, your words are scanned, your preferences predicted, your face read by machinies, the ghosts of MKUltra feel uncomfortably close. Where once LSD and isolation were used to manipulate thought, now it's algorithms and feeds. Where once experiments were done in shadows, now they unfold in broad daylight, hidden in terms and conditions we never read. Have we learned? Have we built protections? Or are we just experimenting differently now with new tools, new targets, and the same justifications? In the end, MKUltra didn't fail because it was stopped. It failed because it worked just enough to prove how dangerous it really was.